Welcome to a new episode of Box Breakers, the podcast that redefines what's possible. Today, we're diving into the art of anticipating the future with a guest whose career is a masterclass in seeing what others miss. I'm incredibly excited to introduce our guest, Giacomo Salvanelli, a true box breaker who went from analyzing crime patterns with geographic information systems to co-founding MineCrime, a company that helps us see future risk and opportunity with stunning clarity. His work is all about turning raw data into actionable foresight, giving us increased power to shape our futures. Welcome, Giacomo. I'm very thrilled to have you here.
Hi, Meret. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure being here and, can't wait to go through the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. So, Giacomo, for our listeners who might not have any touch points with strategic foresight and or crime analysis yet, how would you describe what you do?
From a technical point of view, especially for what is related with our company, MineCrime, actually strategic foresight is crucial for understanding how the context, so the cities where everybody lives in, are changing across time and how these changes might be affecting, especially in the future, the probability of seeing certain crimes occurring in a more frequent way. So actually, foresight is much more crucial than I have ever expected in my whole life, not only from a business point of view, but also from a technical and operational point of view within our company. It's the key element of our predictive risk modeling system.
That's a powerful way to put it. Now, as I've already mentioned in the introduction, you have I would say, fascinating background, moving from crime analysis to then founding such a data-driven risk assessment company like MineCrime. And to me, this seems very unconventional because I'm not in that kind of sphere, but it still seems like a powerful launch pad for understanding future trends and risk in business. So was there like a pivotal moment or like a realization in your work back then as a crime analyst that kind of sparked or illuminated the broader power that foresight has beyond criminal justice and really like applying it to business and risk?
Absolutely, Meret. Consider that the pivotal moment, at least in my career, was when I was working as a crime analyst for the Hampshire Constabulary back in the days in the United Kingdom. And while I was there, I was working with other crime analysts, and our job was actually identifying data sources where we could have collected geographical data about crime across Europe. So identifying new data sources, collecting these data, processing these data, and using these data to inform from an operational point of view, the law enforcement agencies across different regions across Europe. And while I was doing this type of job with my colleagues, we realized that apart from the United Kingdom, where there's an open data system about crime, in all the other regions, there were no available data. So the data was missing. So our work was super tough because we had to, go through a lot of open data sources like journals, social network groups. So we did a lot of hand job. So we worked a lot with our hands trying to identify this data. But this type of process was not scalable. And most importantly, we had a lot of meetings with those corporates that were actually going to be supported by our data in the risk management processes. And they kept saying to us, okay, we are missing this data. There's a gap. Nobody has access to this type of data. If we would have access to this type of data, our risk analysis processes would be completely different. And they were private entities, so they were big corporates. So while I was attending these interviews and I was collecting this information from these corporates, I had a sort of there was an intuition spark. Like I said, okay, it seems that there's a gap in this domain. And if we can fill the gap in this domain, there could be some business coming out of it. And that was the pivotal moment where I switched for a moment my perspective from a purely analytical perspective to a business one. And of course, I didn't do any sort of foresight analysis. I didn't do any type of, industry. I didn't do any type of analysis, but there was an intuition. That was like, okay, there's an opportunity over there. And that was the first moment. That was the first step.
That sounds like literally the dream of every innovator, saying, "Oh, there was this one moment where I really saw, okay, there's a gap that I could be able to fill." Such an interesting story. And when we first met during actually a guest lecture that you gave in my MBA program, which was really interesting, you talked about something called the booster sphere. And you said that this booster sphere of an entrepreneur includes recognizing new profit-making opportunities. So something that you've also just shared, where you can really see, hey, there's a gap and there is a new opportunity. And also awareness of the fluctuations of demand that are there. Is there also, I'm wondering, can you share an instance where your unique analytical lens helped you spot a business opportunity that maybe other traditional corporate settings might have overlooked, apart from the moment that you just shared with us?
Absolutely, Meret. First of all, I would like to say that the booster sphere, as you already mentioned, is for me is the core element that should lead any type of entrepreneurial activity. Because at the end of the day, everybody thinks that running a company is just a matter of business. It's just like, financial metrics, market analysis. But at the end of the day, there is definitely more. There's the intuition. There are the soft skills of an entrepreneur. Because at the end of the day, it's not just having an intuition. Everybody can have an intuition. But being capable of managing maybe the anxiety, the fear, the enthusiasm about going through that intuition is something that, few people have. Like at the end of the day, otherwise everybody could be an entrepreneur. In my personal and professional career, Meret, at the end of the day, my analytical perspective was super useful, not for having the intuition, but for validating the intuition. So when I had the intuition, I said, okay, it seems that according to these few interviews that I've done with, some security managers belonging to these corporates, there's an opportunity. But at the end of the day, intuition is just 5%. Then the rest of it is validation and application. So which means that you need to validate your business idea, your intuition. So my analytical perspective and my analytical approach helped me quite a lot to, at the end of the day, collecting the metrics, getting access to the market, reading through the line, seeing how the market was evolving about the risk management industry, and if it was growing or if it was not growing, and if it was growing, how fast it was growing. So actually, at the end of the day, this analytical approach that was constantly, a part of my life, helped me to analytically process those metrics that were fundamental to transform my intuition, my initial idea, into a concrete business idea that is completely different, in my opinion. So so the second part of the process was actually analyzing the data, the metrics, the analytics about the market.
So would you say that intuition always comes first and then data comes second as the validation, or can it also be vice versa?
I do believe that intuition is something that you might be having regardless of the analytics. I'll try to explain it in a better way. I do believe that, I've seen many of my friends who are running companies that had an intuition while they were randomly or not systematically analyzing data. For example, maybe they were reading articles, papers, they were reading, some statistics about a certain industry, and then they had intuition. So intuition is 99.9% of the times completely disconnected from the data and the analysis that you do around your intuitive idea. It's like a spark. It's like something that comes out of nowhere, bam, you have it. But then the analytical part of the process is crucial to see if your intuition is disconnected or not from reality. So I do believe that, you don't have an exact moment or an exact position of the intuitive phase, but for sure, the analytical part is the second step. So you have the idea, and then you have to validate it. So that's my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Was there also maybe a time or a situation when the data was telling you one thing, but your intuition was telling you something completely different, like the other direction? And how did you go about that? Because it's kind of like an internal fight, thinking, okay, the data is saying one thing, but I have this very strong intuition that it might go in the other direction.
That's a really good question. I think there's a sort of like a line between how big and how far are your intuition and the data. So the more they are close, the more you're obliged to adapt. That's my perspective. The more you're obliged to adapt your intuition, your idea to the data. But of course, if you have a super big distance between the data and your idea, you might be finding yourself in front of two different options or two different cases. One is that you are actually inventing the new Facebook, which might happen, or your idea is too much disconnected from reality, and you might be risking of failing everything about your idea because you haven't had a possibility to validate it before launching it at a market level. So I do believe that the more you see a distance between the idea and the data, the more you have to be bold to pursue your idea, because winner or lose. So like if you win, you win big. If you lose, okay, you lost, you tried, you remain stick to your idea, you remain connected with your initial idea, even though the data were completely the opposite, but you tried it. If your idea is slightly a little bit disconnected from the data, then I think that it's your role as an entrepreneur to adapt your idea to those specific needs of the market. That's exactly what has happened with MineCrime, with our company. We started with an idea, but then we realized that the market was interested in that type of product, but in a different way. So with a different type of vertical, with a different type of approach in terms of analytics. So in front of us, there was, we made a choice. We said, okay, at the end of the day, idea is great. We love it, but we need to get revenues. We need to survive. We need to pay our salaries. We need to keep, to survive, okay, to keep moving forward and to grow. So we need to adapt our software to the specific needs of the market. But because the difference, the gap between our idea and the market metrics was not too big. So that's my point of view about that, Meret. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, definitely. Like, and the more you were talking, I was thinking of how important it is, and it's just getting more and more and more important to also make sure that the data you're using is coming from a trustful place. Because while you were talking also about your intuition and ideas, I was thinking to myself, sometimes I have my moments with ChatGPT where I'm just typing some ideas into ChatGPT and I'm want to brainstorm. And with a lot of the large language models out there, they always love your ideas. They're always like, oh, that's such a fantastic idea. And they try to find data that validates your idea, which I think poses the risk that we might get over our heads and just think, oh, I might invent the new Facebook with this. But yeah, it's not really a neutral picture that the large language model is sometimes giving you, because it's trying to find the data that actually validates your idea, even if it's just 1% of the data that is available. So maybe also to people that are listening and that are doing the same as me, where we're kind of brainstorming ideas with ChatGPT, Do you have any advice for us thinking about, okay, once you've brainstormed your idea, how do you actually go about in finding truthful data, responsible data to validate that?
That's another really good question, Meret. I think that every time that we have an idea, the approach that we put in place in order to validate that idea sometimes is a little bit biased. And I'm saying that because I made this mistake by myself in the past. There's a clear cognitive bias, which is the anchoring, bias, which means that basically you have an idea, business idea, whatever it is, and then the way you look for data is substantially driven by your inside deep need of verifying, validating, and justifying your idea. So I do believe that one of the most tricky part and one of the most difficult part about validation is to identify the best way, the best tool, the best methodology, the best instrument, approach, whatever it is that you can be putting in place to collect unbiased data. Is the most difficult part. Because at the end of the day, if you collect a lot of data, but at the end of the day, they are biased, there's a problem. That's the reason why when we, for example, in our case, when we had our validation meeting with the security managers, our question were not, do you like our features? Do you think they're useful? Do you think that they might be enriching your work? That's a sort of like a question that you are asking from a general point of view to ChatGPT, for example. Okay, so you are indirectly and in a not super transparent way already biasing the way ChatGPT or the security manager might be replying to your questions. We try to adopt an opposite approach. We said, okay, try to imagine you as a security manager that you have the possibility to invent from scratch brand new software that can fill all the gaps that you have on a daily basis. What would you do? So it's up to you to say what you really need. So we completely left the security managers free to describe their ideal software. And we did exactly the same for 50, 60, 70 security managers. And what we did at the end of the day, we collect all this data and we said, okay, 70% of the security managers said that they would need these type of features. So we need to adapt our business idea, our software to these features, at least for 70% of the functionalities, because we need to match that specific need. So, and I end the answer to your question by saying that the most difficult part is collecting and using data that is unbiased. That's why ask directly to the market which are the specific needs in that domains where you're going to run your business idea, instead of saying, this is my business idea. Do you like it? Do you think it's useful? Because you are indirectly biasing already the customer, the user, the one who's going to be giving you back feedbacks about the fact that you are already saying, this is my business idea. So make sure that they are completely disconnected from any type of influence. That's my suggestions. And at the end of the day, that's what we did. And, it worked.
Yeah, bias is such a strong word also for me as someone with a social science background, always trying to think of bias. And I was in preparation of this episode, I was gonna ask you, is intuition just a fancy word for unconscious bias? But I think you actually already framed that perfectly, where it's like correct me if I understood you wrong, but the way I understood it was your intuition is always a little biased just because of the way you are. It's always biased based on your experience, based on who you are as a person, based on the life you lived so far. And how do we make sure, or is there anything that we can do to reduce this kind of bias?
I would say that the only way, it is pretty much impossible to reduce personal biases. Like, we are the product, we are the result of our lives. right? So there's no way you can change your path across the academia, across your works and whatever it is, your jobs. There's no way we can amend it. The other thing that we can do is to be as much unbiased as possible when we try to get data and information from the world around ourselves. So, for example, instead of saying, this is my idea, so I try to put it into the business perspective. So this is my business idea that is clearly the product, the result of my personal life, my professional path, whatever it is. This is my business idea. World, tell me if you find it useful, if it is good or not. For sure, 100%, that the way we are going to be sharing this business idea with the rest of the world, the way we are going to be interpreting the data that comes from the world, the way we are going to be using this type of data is going to be, even though slightly, but it is going to be biased. So the most effective thing, in my opinion, is trying to move yourself out of that biased box and saying, listen, I know which is my idea. So, for example, I need to have a clear, I need to have a clear statement about my idea. My business idea is this, and it falls within this specific domain, market, industry, whatever it is. And according to this segment, this domain, the way you interact with the market need to be neutral as possible. Like, okay, if you would be in this position, what would you do in regard to this specific domain? Which are your needs? Which are your desires? Which are the things that you value the most? Instead of saying, this is my idea, give me a feedback about it. Is it useful? Would you buy it? Because in a way or another, the way you're going to be communicating your idea, the way you're going to be seeing, reading the data that you collect is going to be biased. So try to disconnect in the most neutral way about these type of feedbacks, because we cannot avoid bias. We are a constant bias on a daily basis. The way we talk with people, the way we talk with friends, the way we talk with partners, colleagues, we are biased all the time. So just to make sure that, the way you see the data, that you read between, apart from the intuition, the way you validate your intuition is not biased as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also with the fact that we can't avoid it. We can try to reduce it, but the most important thing that we can do is be aware of it, because then we can actually take counteractions. And for anyone listening, there's actually a really great book called, I think it's just Fast Thinking, Slow Thinking, or Slow Thinking, Fast Thinking, either way around, by Daniel Kahneman. And it is a very, very powerful book on how our brains are wired and why bias is there, and in which direction it is driving us. So anyone who wants to be more aware of their own biases, this is a recommendation from the heart. But maybe I wanted to pull back this curtain a little bit, because we've talked about your path, we've talked about kind of like the what, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about the how. So also for people listening to this, if they're entrepreneurs or not, who want to go from just seeing the future and perceiving it to actively shaping it. And we've talked about intuition a lot, but something that I've also mentioned in the intro is the word foresight, strategic foresight, or the art of foresight. So if you had to put this into one principle, and also maybe distinguish that, if that is possible, from intuition, what would you say? I
would say, of course, this is a biased answer because I'm an analytical person, of course. But I would say in just one sentence, try to read between the lines, try to read between the data. We are fully surrounded by data. And we can use data to actually predict, even though the predictions are never sure. So, we cannot say the future is going to be 100% that one. It's pretty much impossible. We don't have like a crystal ball saying, okay, that is going to be the future. But if you can systematically access to data, try to see how, for example, the business domain, the market where you want to launch your business idea is changing across time. That can give you a lot of information about the future. And it's super easy. You don't have to do like a complex analysis. It's just like, for example, probably you are all aware of like a normal trend analysis. Like imagine that you want to launch a business project in the domain of transportation and mobility. I'm just inventing. If you have the possibility, and now with ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, you can get access to a lot of data, but make sure that the way you ask for that data is unbiased. Otherwise, there's another problem. But if you can access to unbiased data across multiple years, you can make predictions. Like it's a normal trend analysis, guys, which means that you see how your business domain is changing across time and how, according to this trend and pattern, might be changing in the future. So my single sentence, my reply, my answer to that is that use data. I perfectly know that not all of you maybe are data-driven persons or like are people who fall in love with the data. But at the end of the day, sooner or later, you will have to deal with data, even though if you're going to be putting down on paper a business plan, okay? A business plan is data. If you want to raise funds from investors, there's no way you can avoid business plans, like financial plans or whatever it is, projections, metrics, KPIs. So it's still a matter of data if you want to run a company. So make sure that you can use historical data, for example. That's the simplest way to do some sort of like a foresight. Make sure you can use historical data to make predictions about the future. So if you see that, for example, the annual growth metrics, okay? So the famous CAGR, for example, that's a metrics that specifically tells you, according to how the market has changed across time, the projection for the future is going to be this one. That is foresight. So you're going to be saying to the investors, listen, the domain where you're going to be investing, if it is data valued, so if it is data validated, it's going to be growing this way. So that's foresight, guys. It's not like rocket science. So that's my answer. Read between the line, go through the data. And nowadays, you can use plenty of platforms to do it super quickly and super easily, including ChatGPT. The most important thing is collect the data, systematize the data, and then try to read through it using whatever platform it is.
Yeah, you're completely right also when you're saying it's everywhere and we have so many platforms nowadays to access different types of data. It's never been so easy for us. But that could also, especially like talking from a personal perspective, sometimes it feels overwhelming because you're like surrounded by a tsunami of data. And you don't know where to start. How can I put that into practice? And how can I actually, like, where do I start? Where do I begin to dive into this tsunami?
That's another really good question, Meret. I tell you what we did when we started, because I think that, a practical example is even more effective. So when I started, first of all, I tried to have a clear idea about the market where we wanted to launch our project. For example, we started with the Italian market. Okay, so now we are selling our software into different regions around Europe, but we started from Italy. So our first financial plan, our first business plan back in the days was completely focused on our country, on Italy. And what we did was like, okay, the first question that you need to ask yourself and is like, okay, my product, my solution is addressing which type of market, which type of industry, like logistics, transportation, and within logistics are there sub-industries that I'm addressing through my service product solution. For example, in our case, we were addressing the critical infrastructure industries, which were 7 industries. So like logistics, transportation, oil and gas, utilities, telecommunication, banking, health, and I think I'm missing one. But, anyway, critical infrastructure industries. And within these critical infrastructure industries, we are addressing the security management domain. Okay, so which is a subdomain of the critical infrastructure industries. So what I tried to do was, according to this initial analysis that I made, to identify clear metrics about the market within that domain. So I said, okay, the security management industry within the critical infrastructure industries is worth every year in Italy, according to the official statistics, 1 billion euros. Okay, that's the total addressable market. So that is the total market that we can address. Of course, we will never get 100% of customers in that domain. It's pretty much impossible. Maybe yes, in the future, we hope so, but it's pretty much impossible in the first 10, 15 years to get 100% of it. So within that 1 billion, which is reasonably a total amount of clients that we can reach in 3 years, for example. And according to the interviews that we did in the validation period, we said, okay, we talked with 100 security managers. That was a representative sample from Italy. So like they were representing different big companies from the critical infrastructure industries around the country. So it's a representative sample of the total 1 billion market. We finally converted 25% of them, which means 250 millions of euros, okay, approximately. So we said, okay, if we keep pushing this way with this go-to-market strategy, we can reach maybe in 10 years, 15 years time, 250 million euros in revenues, fully bootstrapped, so without any external investments. That was a super simplified, way of using the data and getting access to the data. So I go back to your question, how can you do it? First of all, make it super clear which is the industry and the subdomain of your industry that you are addressing with your product and solution first, rather than searching for all the data that you can have about a specific domain or industry. So be super clear about who is your ICP, which is your domain, and which is your industry. Then, when you make it clear, go for the precise data that you collect about those specific, variables. And you can use a lot of platforms. For example, in our country, we have the National Statistical Institutes, the ISTAT, and I'm sure that is presented the same way in Germany, in France, UK. Any country has its own National Statistical Institute. And they provide a lot of statistics about that. They provide a lot of information about the different market segments, market domains, how they are performing and how they are changing on a yearly basis. So we got access to that type of data. And we quantified our market through open access statistics. But the first step was a quite long analysis about which is your ICP, industry, domain. That's the tricky part. Be as specific as possible and try to avoid any sort of noises around yourself that could be misleading the way you interpret and quantify your market.
I really like that answer, and I really like the fact that you said to get really clear about it, to get get the metrics and get really clear about what it is that you want to do and that you're looking for, because that thinking of different areas, that applies to other situations as well. Me, as someone who conducts trainings or facilitates workshops with employees, often when we design workshops, we go from one idea to another and we're kind of bouncing around. And then in the end, we're like, wait. Is that actually serving the purpose that we wanted to serve? And is that actually bringing us closer to our goal? Or is that a lot of noise? That might be beautiful noise. That might be very interesting noise to get into. But is it bringing us in the right direction or not? So really like the idea of getting your clear metrics in the beginning to start.
Exactly.
Something that you said was also, you were talking about a foresight technique called trend analysis. And I know that is one of the foresight techniques. I know that there's also scanning and scenario development. Maybe you can walk us through that a little and tell us what is behind these techniques.
Sure, Meret. First of all, we could group all these techniques, these approaches, into two major groups: qualitative and quantitative ones. Of course, by their nature, they are different in the way they are implemented, and the type of information that you can collect using these two major groups of approaches and methodologies. I do believe that at the end of the day, quantitative approaches, you cannot avoid them sooner or later, because if you want to run a company, if you want to run a business, sooner than later, you have to provide metrics, quantitative metrics. So you cannot avoid the quantitative one. But the qualitative one, especially in the first phase of your, not analytical, but in the way you shape your business idea and you try to get a vision about the future, are fundamental. For example, in our case, at the very beginning, we used, even though it was only at the beginning, but it was super useful, we used, for example, the scenario planning. So the scenario planning is one of my favorite qualitative methodologies. There are plenty of them. But it's one of those methodologies where you have to put yourself in the condition of being a sort of like a sort of narrator, like a story writer. Okay, so imagine that you have to write down a story, and the core of your story is your company. So you have to think about potential futures, plausible futures about your company. So when we started, we and my co-founders, we met all together. We were there and we started to say, okay, how we see the future and which are the factors that might be affecting our future. Okay. So for example, we said, okay, one of the most relevant variable that might be affecting the future that we're going to be having ahead is the new norms and regulations that are coming out, that are potentially coming out about risk management. Okay. The so famous norm ISO 31000, which is a ISO, which is an international regulation norm that obliges certain companies to stick to certain processes in terms of risk management. And this norm was being discussed back in the days. So it was not approved yet. And if that norm or regulation would have been approved, that would have obliged companies to adapt to certain guidelines and norms when it comes to risk management, which means that we would have been able to sell our software super quickly because we are fully compliant. We said, okay, we have this data. We are the only one providing this type of information to corporates. So let's buy our product. Super easy, even the go-to-market strategy. But if that norm or regulation would have not approved, that would have made our go-to-market strategy more complex. Not impossible, of course, but more complex because your value proposition would have been compromised, the biggest one. So we said, okay, scenario planning. What is going to happen if the norms and the regulation is going to be approved? You have one plausible future. And then you say, what is going to happen if it is not going to be approved? You have another plausible future. Okay. And according to these two futures, how we're going to be managing what comes out of these two futures. Okay. If everything goes well, probably our revenues are going to go up. And we can definitely invest more money, for example, in marketing and communication activities because you have more money to be invested. I'm trying to oversimplify the process, but you're going to be investing more money to sell even more. Adversely, if the norms or regulations are not going to be approved, we are going to be having less revenues. So we definitely need to be much more focused on how exploiting at our best the fewer money that we have because our revenues are a little bit compromised. So as you can see, the two different scenarios might be leading you as an entrepreneur to two completely different management processes about your company, okay? And if you are prepared for both of these scenarios, then when one of these scenarios happen, you already know what to do from a strategic point of view. And then when you know what to do from an operational and strategic point of view, you can corroborate that strategy using a quantitative method that can validate your strategy. And you have to do for both. Consider that some companies that I know, some friends of mine, they normally develop up to 6 different scenarios about the future with different combinations of potential variables. Of course, the more variables you put in the system, the more the scenarios grow, and the more the complexity of your foresight is bigger. Is a much more complex type of foresight, qualitative foresight analysis. Okay, but that's the first step, and in my opinion, is crucial. So first of all, try to put yourself, when you're running a company, in front of potential scenarios that you might be having in front of yourself. Okay, potential scenarios, good scenarios, bad scenarios, intermediate scenarios. And according to these scenarios, even though it may be sounding like you're wasting a lot of time because you have to think about scenarios that potentially might not be happening, but still they could happen. So be sure that you are prepared for any type of scenario. And then when you have these type of scenarios in front of yourself, try to validate the best operational strategies that you can be putting in place to manage the consequences of these scenarios. And so that's basically my suggestion, Meret. There are plenty of methodologies, plenty of approaches: quantitative, qualitative, trend analysis, scan, horizon, ABM, scenario planning. Plenty of them. Plenty. You could Google. You have 100 different approaches. Okay, but my suggestion is when you start from a qualitative one. Try to read between the line, try to, qualitatively speaking, define the scenarios and the potential futures that you might be having in front of yourself, and then use a quantitative approach to validate each of these scenarios. So you need, potentially by using the data, you might be seeing that 3 scenarios out of 4 that you have thought about your company cannot be validated because the data are telling you something different. So you already know that those 3 scenarios cannot happen. Okay, that's really good because instead of thinking about strategies for 4 scenarios, you just have to focus on 1 scenario because the other 3 haven't been validated by your data. So that's the thing. Start with qualitative, move to quantitative, and then decide according to the results and to the outcome about the future, the best operational strategy to be putting in place.
So do you think the traditional business plan is outdated then? If we need to have different scenarios and we need to constantly analyze, especially in a world that is constantly changing like ours, and was talking to a colleague about this yesterday. In the 2000s and 2010s, we talked a lot about VUCA world, but now we actually move from VUCA to something called BANI, which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. So even more changing. And is this idea of a business plan with fixed projections that entrepreneurs use also to score investments, is that outdated? Is that dead? Or do we just need a more dynamic approach to it?
Thanks for the question. And I would say that the business plan is a key element for an historical company. So for a company that has, a substantial financial history. So maybe, 20 years old company, 10 years old company. Why? Because you can, according to how you manage the operations, even though now the market is changing super fast, but still the way that company has put itself in the market across the last 20 years can allow you to put down on paper decent projections in your business plan. So business plan still makes sense there. When it comes to startups and new companies, I would say that 90% of the times business plans are pure, unreal projections based on still a market analysis, but completely unreal when it comes to fidelization. And I explain that in a better way. It's clear that you have metrics that you can use to put down on paper, even though you're a startup or a new co, a decent business plan. Okay, the market metrics are there. You take those metrics, you put in your business plan because you're running a company in the same domain. So you assume that those metrics are going to be your metrics as well in 3 years' time. But the thing that you don't value, that you don't consider, is all the external variables, like the country where you're going to run your company, the client's fidelizations, the changes in the social environment, the changes in the habits. You're not considering any of these type of any of these variables. So I would say that for startups, a single version of a business plan is completely useless. It doesn't make any sense. Completely useless. But it makes sense to put down on paper 3/4 different business plans. For example, you say, okay, I don't know how, even though I've got all the metrics, but I don't know how my company is going to process. Okay. So I prepare the worst case scenario business plan. So the business plan that, is going to become real if everything is fucked up. Then you have the best scenario business plan. So like, okay, the best scenario as possible in terms of metrics and KPIs business plan. Super good. Then you have the middle positioned business plan. So if you're capable of putting down on paper 2/3 versions at least of business plans, then that is much more reliable than one single business plan saying, this is my future. That's it. I'm sure 100%, give me $10 million, give me 10 million euros, and I will be there. It doesn't make it, for me, it's completely unreal. That's why when we first talked with investors, even though we haven't fundraised yet money, from VCs or proper investors, because we bootstrapped, we prepared 3 business plans. We said, this is the worst case scenario. This is the best case scenario. This is the intermediate one, which is going to be probably the most real one. So the intermediate one. So according to these metrics, the potential valuation is going to be this, that one, and the other one. That's much more reliable. So I don't think it is useless nowadays. But if you don't go through multiple business plans, then it is useless.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking while you were explaining, and also thinking back to your path of being involved with crime analysis and spending years of analyzing future threats, also opportunities, but definitely risk, threats. Has there ever been a moment where foresight felt like a burden? It's more like a personal question, like maybe like a sense, like an overwhelming sense of awareness or responsibility, and from a very personal standpoint, if there has ever been something like that, how do you manage that?
You know what, Meret? I'm going to be giving you an answer from a personal point of view. Even though I'm a really analytical guy, up to my early 20s, I was completely the opposite. Completely. No forecast at all. Like, forecast, even for my personal life, was completely not considered. Absolutely not. And all of a sudden, when I found myself in the condition of dealing with an uncertain situation that was hidden in my face, then I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, because all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you don't know what to do. I mean, it keeps happening, of course, because that's life. I mean, it's impossible to avoid that. But at the end of the day, back in those days, I was completely unprepared to deal with uncertain situations. And they were happening in my life. So all of a sudden, foresight became my scaffolding. It became literally scaffolding for my life. So I always try to foresight. Apart from my job, also in my personal life, I keep forecasting. I keep saying, okay, if I'm going to behave this way, probably something is going to happen. It might be happening this one, it might be happening that one, and how I'm going to be dealing with these different type of scenarios. It's not just a matter of having control of things. It's not just controlling things. It's just a matter of, it's like, if I would have to make a comparison, it's like running through a corridor during the night with something that is covering your eyes. You're running, you don't see anything, you smash yourself into the walls, into the I don't know, columns or whatever it is, you make a lot of damages to yourself. Foresighting is like it keeps running in that dark corridor without something that is covering up your eyes. You still don't see too well because it's still dark. It's 3 a.m, so you don't see anything, or at least you see less than normal, eyesight. You can still hurt yourself, but at least a few seconds before hitting the wall, you know that you're hitting the wall. So you say, okay, wow, oh wait, I need to stop a little bit. Maybe I need to change direction. If you keep shut your eyes, you smash yourself into the walls and you make a lot of damages, and you still have to run through the corridor. So I never felt foresight as a burden, because at the end of the day, I keep making decisions according to my intuition, my thoughts, my ideas about what I have to do. But actually, foresight is something that if you put in your life, I do believe, and I strongly believe, that can help you a lot at pursuing a path that is less risky, not zero risk, but less risky than usual.
Thank you for that answer. That was very, very honest, and I like the metaphor with the dark corridor. I can see it in the back of my head. We've talked about the how, the methodologies, and maybe let's zoom out a little bit again. We've also talked a lot about entrepreneurs and startups, but I know that people listening might not all be entrepreneurs. Some might be working in corporates, and might try to also apply strategic foresight within corporates, and urging corporates that are often known, sadly, for this corporate inertia, to rather focus on inaction than on action and waiting to adapt. But I think, and probably also what I just gathered from our conversation, is that foresight can be leveraged not just to adapt to future trends, to things that are coming, to the walls you might run into, but also to disrupt your own industry or create an entirely new market. Speaking also for people who are not entrepreneurs, who are not in startups, who might be facing more of these corporate bureaucracy burdens, how can we still try and instill foresight even in such a corporate setting where it might be more, what there's just more of a bureaucracy burden around it?
That's another really good question, Meret. From my experience, dealing with foresight in a corporate framework strongly depends on the management system. If you don't have a management that is capable of and that wants to look at the future and wants to try to forecast, it is pretty much impossible you can move that approach below the pyramid of roles within the corporate domain. Everything starts from the top management, okay? Because the middle management, the sub-management normally are depending on the top management, decisions. So what I've seen in the past, but even nowadays, because we work with corporate. So at the end of the day, our software, especially in the security domain, is the specific representation of how you can apply forecast and foresight. So forecast about risk in a corporate domain. So even though it's a subdomain of a corporate, but still is a forecasting. We had many problems with those companies or corporates that don't have top managers or unit managers that are capable of adopting this approach. So the only way to change that approach is to show them the advantages from a financial point of view of forecasting and foresight. Why? Any manager thinks about the daily operations and the work they are doing in the company in terms of financials, metrics. They have to perform, they have to reach KPIs, because if they are not the CEO, they will surely have some managers above them. So they constantly try to collect these metrics and say, listen, look at these metrics. I was great this year, okay? So the only way to change the attitude towards forecast within a corporate domain is to show them the financial advantages of the application of these methodologies. So it's a tough job, because any type of approach, any type of forecasting, foresight methodology, if you want to really implement them inside the operations of your company, it is going to cost money. At the end of the day, you need to hire someone, or you need to train someone, or you need to make sure that someone is going to work on these specific KPIs, data, and information. But if you can justify these investments, these expenses, because in their opinion are expenses, saying the result is going to be this one, so the return on the investments that you are making is going to be per 10, per 100, maybe 200, it is going to be worth it. So the only way to do that, and I end my answer, the only way to bring foresight within a corporate, fully structured, rich of bureaucracy, is to make sure that the top managers can understand, see, and accept the financial value of that methodology, that approach. That's the difficult part. It's like selling a product to your top managers. It's definitely this. You're selling a product. So if you're good enough to sell this sort of approach and methodology, then it can be applied from top down. That's the thing that I've seen. Even when we sell our software to our clients, everything starts from the top management, because the analytical security managers says to the top manager, listen, if we're going to be using this software, you're going to be reducing risk and damages by 40%, 50%. Then the top manager, from a financial point of view, says, okay, this is worth it from a financial point of view. Let's go for it. So you definitely, whoever is going to be working in corporate and wants to bring these methodologies inside of the company, in my opinion, that's the only way to make sure that they are going to be accepted.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's like the first internal box, so to say, that they have to break. And then probably also we talked about biases that top management holds about, even maybe sometimes even about their own customers, and really daring to go into like trying something out and going into another direction. If we're looking ahead, and I already said like internal box that we have to break in connection to the name of this podcast. If we try and look ahead into the future, what is one critical box related to strategic planning, strategic foresight, or decision making in organizations that you believe more corporations need to break out of to really thrive in this future that, as we said, is characterized by just hyper change all the time?
In my opinion, Meret, the most tricky box is there are two boxes, in my opinion. The first one is the financials. Corporates, especially corporates, in a market, in a world that is super quickly changing, they are scared as hell about protecting their financials, their economics, let's say. And any type of investment, especially when it comes to innovation, because that's an innovative process, like changing your approach towards a certain domain means innovating yourself. And if you look at the metrics, if you look at the statistics worldwide, every time there's an environment that is fastly changing, the investment in innovation processes go down. It's recurring. It's something pretty much stable. Every time there's a stable financial scenario, so you are safe and sound about your metrics, you have guarantees, you say, okay, I can invest more, okay? But when it's the opposite, investments in innovation goes down. So I do believe that, considering that we are looking at a market that is super fastly changing, one of the boxes that we need to break, that everybody needs to break, is the fear of losing money. I perfectly understand that it's a critical part of corporates, but at the end of the day, investing money, you need to save some money to do critical investments in order to innovate those processes that are crucial for your company. And in a situation where you don't know anything about how the market is changing, or you cannot predict how the market is changing, probably implementing methodologies that can help you and better predict how market is going to change in the future is definitely a good idea. So that's the first box, not being scared about making investments in order to implement these methodologies. Sometimes corporates are scared of investing even 2 pennies in something that is not related with the core business, but that's the first box. And nowadays, there are plenty of opportunities. When we talk with companies, we normally say, listen, there are plenty of opportunities with subsidized finance options. You get access to, fundings. You can get access to grants. You can get access to a lot of credits, financial credits from the local governments. There are plenty of options that can help you at saying, okay, I'm safe and sound to invest, 100,000 euros. Okay. So break the box of financial risk and try to identify, in my opinion, other ways to protect your investments that is necessary to be done now. The second box, in my opinion, is the bias. The bias. I've seen so many times, even with our clients, big corporates, that in the way they also interpret and see data, for example, coming, and I'm talking about, of course, the security management domain, but it can be applicable, I guess, to any different type of areas of these companies. The way they see sometimes data is biased. So the second box is learn how to go beyond our personal bias that might be affecting our capacity at foresighting. That's another major problem. And imagine the complexity of a corporate where you have hundreds of managers, thousands of employees. Each of them is personally biased and corporate biased. So imagine how risky it might be actually foresighting in such a bureaucratically driven, vertical, entity. Super complex to avoid biases. But that's the other box that you need to break. Try to put yourself out of the box of biases in order to see what really the market needs from your company. These are the two boxes that I think are crucial nowadays for any corporate.
That's a great call to action. And also looking at the time and how long we've spoke, I think it's a topic that we could probably talk about for days on end. But I love to end on this call to action that you just gave.
Time for ponderables.
So as I am listening to the episode again, I have noted down a few of my thoughts. Let me walk you through them. When Giacomo talked about anchoring bias, something landed hard for me.
Anchoring bias, as he puts it, is the tendency to look for data that only justifies what we already want to believe. And it made me wonder how many of us are actually looking for the truth in our data, and how many are just looking for permission to keep doing what we're already doing. Permission to keep building the product we're emotionally attached to, permission to stay married to an idea that once felt brilliant, permission not to pivot, not to be wrong, not to start again, basically. And that thought is kind of scary, right? Because if we collect biased data, we don't just get bad answers, we build bad futures. We end up designing a solution for a market that doesn't exist. So here's a question I noted down that I'm going to ask myself, and I'm passing it on to you too. Where in your current projects are you proving something instead of testing something? If you strip away your current project goals, would the data still point you in the same direction? Another point or another thing that really struck me was when Giacomo described how MineCrime validated their idea. That was actually one of my favorite moments from our conversation, because at MineCrime, they didn't ask security managers, do you like our features? They asked, if you could invent software from scratch to fill your gaps, what would it be? So they basically gave their customers a blank slate and let them describe their ideal world. And to be honest, that question takes a lot of humility, because it forces you to stop being the expert for once. I mean, our podcast is called Box Breaker, so it's kind of like breaking out of this expert box, because it breaks that invisible ego barrier where we defend our ideas as if they were fragile statues, instead of actually shutting up, sitting down, and listening. And by doing this, as Giacomo said, they actually discovered that the market wanted something different than what they originally planned to build. So they then also had the guts to really change. And I'm thinking to myself, in your own work or team, when was the last time you stopped defending your features and actually asked someone to design their dream solution from scratch? If I handed my clients a clean sheet of paper today, no legacy, no sunk costs, no pride, what would they draw? And would we then also have the humility to pivot and to follow it? And finally, let's talk about that dark corridor. The metaphor that Giacomo shared was, to me, such a vivid image. Let's recap it. He said you're running full speed through a dark hallway without foresight. You're running blind and you're smashing into walls. And with foresight, you're still in the dark, but you can see the wall a few seconds before you hit it. So foresight basically doesn't turn on the lights. It just lets you see the wall a few seconds before you smash into it. You don't get certainty, you get reaction time. And maybe that's enough. Stay with me here. He called foresight scaffolding for his life during uncertain times. And I'm thinking we usually treat strategic planning as a dry corporate exercise, but Giacomo describes it as a sort of mental survival tool, a way to manage anxiety, to manage fear, and perhaps even like a way to give our nervous system something like a pause button before panic takes over. Now I'm thinking, if we viewed looking ahead not as a way to be right, but as a way to be ready, how would that change our daily stress levels? Can we maybe use tools such as scenario planning, so imagining the worst, middle, and best cases, not just for our businesses, but as a form of personal scaffolding to keep us upright when things get fucked up, as Giacomo bluntly said it. So here's the question that's echoing in my head as I close this recording. Where in my life or work do I need scaffolding? Where am I currently sprinting in the dark when I could at least give myself a flashlight? Because I'm thinking that the future isn't just something that happens to us. It's something we can learn to meet halfway. And maybe this thought even hits harder right now because I'm saying it at the end of 2025. Today is the 29th of December. So this is the moment when everyone is scribbling goals, setting targets, they're manifesting, they're planning. They're just trying to get ready or feel ready for 2026. But Giacomo just taught us that foresight is not a crystal ball. It's not certainty. It's just a few seconds of visibility before impact. So maybe let's not try and predict 2026, but brace for it. Meet it with our eyes open. Walk into the year not with confidence, but with preparedness. Not with guarantees, but with grounded options. And not with I know, but with I am ready enough. So as 2025 exhales and 2026 begins to form on the horizon, wishing you all the best for the new year. And I'll ask you this one last thing. What futures are you willing to see a few seconds sooner? And who might you become if you gave yourself that head start? For now, let's go back to the episode.
It brings us to this end of this insightful episode. Giacomo, thank you so much for challenging us to look at the future not as something that happens to us, but as something that we can actively engineer. And maybe before we finally wrap up, a quick question for you, as I always like to ask that to any guest that comes here. Do you have any recommendations? It can be a book, an article, a concept, even a mindset that you think our listeners should explore if they're looking to foster more innovation or impact in their own work?
First of all, Meret, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed the podcast. I think it's super curious to listen to the other sessions that you had. And I would say that entrepreneurial path, there are two different things that actually, helped me quite a lot. One is a book that I read, which is super famous. I probably 90% of the listeners already read it, which is the Lean Startup Model, written by Eric Rice. In my opinion, is one of the most relevant books ever if you want to run a brand new company, especially nowadays, because it gives you a lot of insights, it gives you a lot of hints, a lot of tips about how to rationalize the business process. So both from a qualitative and a quantitative point of view, both the validation, the go-to-market, business operations, it helps you a lot with real stories. So it gives you a lot of stories about real companies and how they processed and engineered all these type of scenarios and information. So one is, please make sure that you read this book. It's super quick to read, but it's super useful. And the other thing is that try to work in order to unbias yourself. That's another tricky thing. If you want to run a company, if you want to start your entrepreneurial path, make sure that you unbias yourself, guys. That's the most risky thing that you might be encountering in your entrepreneurial path, especially not professional, but entrepreneurial path. Because everything relies upon not fundraising, not raising money from investors, not collecting tons of millions of dollars from banks or whatever, but it's about selling something. Regardless of what it is, product, service, solution, consultancy, service, whatever it is, but it's about selling something that people are willing to pay. So make sure that you unbias yourself in the way you're going to be proposing to the world your idea. That's the other thing. I don't know how you can do it. I found out myself how to do it for myself, but everybody needs to find a way to do it on your own. But please make sure that you do it.
Thank you for the recommendation. And that is exactly also what this podcast is about, is we do not have all the answers, but we have questions to ask, and we can give you questions to ask yourself and to think about it yourself. So thank you very much. And to our listeners, if Giacomo's story has inspired you to dive deeper into the art of foresight, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. You can find more about Giacomo and his work on his LinkedIn profile, which we will link below in our show notes. And with that, I can just say thank you again. Until then, keep breaking those boxes, and thank you for listening.